director Kashpatel, nothing less than a profound, unforgivable, and utterly shameful disgrace to the sacred badge that generations of truly dedicated and selfless agents have worn with unyielding honor and integrity while protecting this nation from real, tangible threats, rather than fabricating political enemies out of whole cloth simply to advance narrow partisan agendas and settle personal scores. In that single, blistering condemnation delivered with the rock-solid confidence of a political legend who had navigated and dominated Washington's treacherous waters for more than 4 decades, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi unmistakably believed she had fired the opening salvo that would dismantle not just the hearing, but Kashpatel's entire reputation in one fell swoop. During what she had carefully orchestrated as her definitive public takedown of the newly confirmed FBI director in an overflowing House Judiciary Committee hearing on a bitterly cold October morning deep into 2025. As someone who has devoted years to closely examining the raw mechanics of American politics, focusing especially on the delicate balance between power, genuine accountability, and the frequent tension where personal gain collides with public responsibility, I am convinced that this extraordinary exchange revealed a fundamental truth about our political system. When deeply entrenched figures who have quietly built immense personal wealth through decades of intimate access to legislative decision-making finally face an adversary prepared to present meticulously documented public records in a calm, unflinching manner, without resorting to anger or exaggeration, their long-maintained facade of absolute moral authority can begin to crack in ways that expose underlying inconsistencies. And here, Kashpatel's composed, evidence-based response served not as petty revenge, but as a vital public correction to years of one-sided moral outrage that had conveniently protected certain powerful insiders while relentlessly pursuing others for infinitely lesser infractions. Every advanced camera arrayed throughout the packed room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building immediately trained its lens on Pelosi's face as those incendiary words rang out, capturing the subtle yet unmistakable flash of satisfaction in her expression that suggested she was already mentally rehearsing the flood of supportive media coverage portraying her as the unyielding sentinel of democratic institutions, courageously confronting a perceived Trump loyalist inexplicably placed at the helm of the FBI. She sat there in her deliberately selected crimson Armani suit, a power color she had deployed effectively in past high-profile televised confrontations, including the iconic moment she ripped up President Trump's State of the Union address, flanked by an extensive support team that included 3 seasoned senior aides, 2 dedicated communications professionals ready to shape the immediate aftermath narrative, and a high-end attorney whose hourly fees alone surpassed the weekly income of most American families working full-time jobs. The entire hearing chamber vibrated with a tense, almost electric anticipation reminiscent of the buildup before major political showdowns that capture national attention as leading networks like CNN and MSNBC had claimed optimal filming positions after receiving subtle advance notice that this particular session would deliver dramatic, highly shareable moments guaranteed to dominate online platforms and evening broadcasts for days to come, while Republican committee members shared discreet signals of cautious optimism, sensing that Pelosi's aggressive opening might have unintentionally created exploitable openings for their side. Pelosi had made the rare choice to arrive a full 20 minutes ahead of schedule, a significant deviation from her established pattern of strategically arriving fashionably late to assert subtle dominance over proceedings, giving her professional makeup artist ample time to perfect her appearance beneath the unforgiving overhead lights, ensuring her signature pearls reflected every beam perfectly, and her overall look projected unbreakable command as she geared up to systematically discredit the man she had spent years framing as a dangerous, unqualified partisan, utterly unfit for any role involving national security. Directly across the witness table sat Kashpatel, presenting himself entirely solo, without the usual protective shield of aides, media handlers, or legal advisors that most prominent witnesses surround themselves with in such high-stakes environments. Clad in a sharply tailored navy suit, while holding only a thick manila folder and a plain bottle of water, his demeanor remarkably calm and composed as he carefully assessed the room's configuration, including precise camera placements, seating arrangements of committee members, and the noticeable concentration of Pelosi's entourage clustered behind her. Pelosi regarded his calm entrance with barely concealed disdain that bordered on open contempt, her thoughts immediately revisiting the pivotal role this same individual had played in drafting the controversial Nunes memo that first exposed significant abuses within the FBI's surveillance processes, material she had consistently dismissed as a contrived partisan fabrication intended solely to shield a president she vehemently opposed. And yet, despite her earlier concerted efforts to professionally derail him, he now held the FBI directorship she viewed as completely illegitimate and dangerously misplaced. When the Republican chairman from Ohio at last brought down the gavel to officially open the proceedings and rapidly navigated through the standard preliminary matters, every person in the room understood these formalities were simply the calm before the storm. And Pelosi seized the moment without hesitation to launch her meticulously prepared verbal assault designed to redefine the narrative around Patel's leadership from the very start.
Director Patel, allow me to cut through any unnecessary civility and state plainly what the American people have a right to know when assessing the individual currently entrusted with leading their most vital law enforcement institution during these profoundly unstable and threatening times. She pressed forward, her voice escalating with the refined indignation she had mastered across decades in public life, as she pointed sharply for dramatic emphasis, making certain every gesture landed clearly within multiple camera frames. You have never exhibited the essential attributes of an authentic, nonpartisan law enforcement professional dedicated to upholding justice irrespective of politics. Instead, you have consistently functioned as a purely ideological operative, essentially serving as a designated enforcer tasked with redirecting the FBI's considerable resources toward targeting the political opponents of the administration that appointed you to this sensitive post. She paused strategically for maximum impact, glancing across the Democratic side of the committee for visible signs of support, fully expecting that selectively edited segments of this confrontation would saturate cable news programming and social media ecosystems for an extended period afterward. You personally authored a document that has been thoroughly debunked and discredited, designed exclusively to provide cover for a president undergoing entirely appropriate and necessary congressional oversight. You actively promoted unfounded conspiracy theories that seriously undermined public confidence in foundational institutions and potentially compromised critical intelligence sources and operational methods. And you progressed through multiple high-level positions, not because of any demonstrated expertise or qualification, but purely due to your established willingness to execute politically driven directives. With yet another calculated, gradual shake of her head, expressing deep sorrow, she conveyed profound regret for what she portrayed as the irreversible tarnishing of a once revered agency now diminished by his very presence at its head. And now, Director Patel, you have the presumption to occupy the identical chair once held by J. Edgar Hoover, a historical figure whose complicated legacy already carries substantial baggage without your contribution as an individual who, based on my direct observation over decades of service, constitutes nothing short of a profound and lasting disgrace to the emblem proudly displayed by thousands of committed agents who risk
everything daily in service to this country. A wave of audible reactions rippled through the packed gallery. Journalists typed at frantic speed on their devices, and Democratic committee members leaned forward with clear approval because this performance embodied the classic Pelosi approach. The deadly combination of razor-sharp verbal precision and theatrical flair that had previously neutralized so many formidable opponents throughout her long career. Patel, nevertheless, stayed completely motionless during the entirety of her prolonged attack, showing no visible sign of anger, discomfort, or even mild surprise. His steadiness, honed through years of confronting far more intimidating figures in his prior role as a federal terrorism prosecutor, rendering Pelosi's intense rhetorical barrage almost routine in comparison. When she eventually concluded her initial broadside, he calmly reached for his water bottle and took a deliberate, unhurried sip, permitting several long seconds of heavy silence to envelop the room while cameras remained firmly focused on him, waiting expectantly for the kind of emotional outburst that would align perfectly with the media's favored depiction of a cornered appointee reacting defensively under pressure. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Pelosi, for offering such a detailed and passionate introduction that lays out your viewpoint so comprehensively from the outset, he replied finally, his voice remaining remarkably even and almost conversational in tone, as though she had merely extended standard courtesies rather than delivered a nationally broadcast attempt to dismantle his professional legitimacy. Before I begin addressing the particular assertions you've made concerning my career trajectory and appropriateness for this directorship, I would like to raise a simple question rooted in basic arithmetic that I believe many citizens tuning in today might consider especially pertinent given the serious nature of accusations involving disgrace and questions of personal conduct while holding public office. Pelosi's gaze sharpened instantly, her body language shifting subtly because this unexpected serene shift toward numerical discussion fell completely outside the range of responses her team had anticipated and prepared for. She had readied herself for visible defensiveness, possibly elevated tones or awkward denials, not a composed detour into mathematics. Patel opened his manila folder with careful, intentional movements, the faint sound of papers being separated suddenly amplified in the now profoundly quiet chamber. You have provided distinguished service to California's constituents in Congress for 38 consecutive years, throughout which the standard annual salary for members has reliably stayed around $174,000, a solid but by no means extravagant compensation package for individuals in elected federal positions. He looked up directly, establishing steady eye contact that conveyed concentration without any trace of hostility. Upon your initial election and entry into Congress back in 1987, your required public financial disclosures listed a net worth of approximately $3 million, a substantial figure at the time primarily derived from your husband's successful real estate developments and investment activities during that era. The atmosphere in the room grew unnaturally still, with even ordinary background sounds like shifting papers or quiet conversations completely ceasing as participants began to sense the direction this careful presentation was heading. Current estimates compiled from mandatory financial disclosure forms, independent analyses conducted by nonpartisan organizations such as Open Secrets, and various other credible tracking sources place your family's total net worth at approximately $280 million, a truly staggering escalation over the span of your extended congressional career. He allowed a short but deliberate pause to ensure the sheer scale fully registered with everyone present. That level of growth equates to more than a 2,000% increase overall. And if one were to attempt explaining such accumulation based solely on congressional salary earnings, it would hypothetically require well over 3,000 years of uninterrupted service at the current pay rate, to reach that figure through legitimate compensation alone. A Republican member seated toward the rear inadvertently dropped his pen, the resulting clatter echoing sharply like a small explosion in the sudden void of sound, causing a nearby C-SPAN camera to pivot quickly and capture his visibly shocked facial expression for broadcast. So, my straightforward question, Congresswoman, which connects directly to ongoing discussions about disgrace and ethical standards in government service, concerns exactly how that remarkable financial expansion took place during your decades exercising significant influence over legislative matters. Pelosi's earlier confident expression had entirely disappeared by this point, replaced by noticeable tension around her eyes and mouth as she tightly gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning pale under the intense scrutiny of multiple high-resolution cameras recording every detail. And isn't it entirely fair for average citizens facing persistent economic challenges to question whether such extraordinary wealth building, while occupying positions of substantial public authority, naturally invites legitimate scrutiny regarding potential access to information or opportunities not equally available to ordinary investors working hard to support their families? Patel, clearly sensing the shifting dynamic in the room, removed the first set of documents from his folder with the steady, methodical approach of a seasoned prosecutor presenting evidence not for sensational effect, but for clear public understanding. Allow me to assist in exploring that question in greater depth, because the American people truly deserve complete context whenever grave allegations of disgrace are advanced with such absolute certainty. He continued in his consistently measured delivery that never deviated from ordinary conversational volume. Your husband, Paul Pelosi, is without question a highly capable venture capitalist managing financial leasing services based in San Francisco, and his overall business acumen and success remain undisputed in general terms. He raised the document high enough for cameras to capture details clearly. But let's take a closer look at several specific transactions that occurred during periods when you held roles involving substantial influence over legislation and regulatory oversight, impacting technology industries, financial markets, and antitrust enforcement policies. Pelosi began shifting noticeably in her seat, her attorney leaning forward with an expression of growing alarm that suggested he recognized the potentially damaging terrain being entered. For instance, in June of 2022, your husband purchased 20,000 shares of NVIDIA stock, along with associated call options valued between $1 and $2 million, an acquisition that took place just weeks before Congress passed the CHIPS Act, providing $52 billion in direct subsidies to the semiconductor sector. A major piece of legislation that you personally championed and actively guided through the House approval process. The resulting surge in NVIDIA's share price generated considerable profits for investors who were positioned advantageously prior to the public legislative action. He moved smoothly to the next document without any pause. In a similar vein, December 2010 saw the purchase of Tesla call options potentially worth up to $1 million shortly before the incoming Biden administration publicly announced comprehensive plans to convert the entire federal vehicle fleet to electric models, a policy shift that would directly and substantially benefit manufacturers like Tesla. Once again, the timing aligned in an extraordinarily favorable manner. Another document followed immediately. Then, on July 1st of 2024, 2,000 shares of Visa valued at a minimum of $500,000 were sold, followed less than 3 months later by the Department of Justice unveiling a significant antitrust lawsuit against the company that caused its stock value to decline sharply. The position had already been fully liquidated before the negative impact materialized. Yet one more paper was presented. And in December 2022, 30,000 shares of Google were divested for roughly $2.7 million, succeeded just 1 month afterward by another major DOJ antitrust action that similarly depressed the company's stock price. Patel neatly organized the documents into a single stack, gesturing openly with both hands for emphasis. These examples represent just a portion of a broader pattern involving consistently well-timed investment decisions coinciding with pivotal government announcements and actions in sectors where congressional committees you actively participated in held substantial oversight authority and legislative power. Either your husband possesses an almost supernatural level of market timing ability that routinely surpasses the collective expertise of top Wall Street professionals, or, and this is the question that many everyday Americans are increasingly asking themselves, there exists some form of informational advantage flowing within your shared household that remains inaccessible to typical market participants trying to build secure futures. Pelosi's legal counsel started scribbling notes at a rapid pace, passing several urgent messages her direction that she waved away with visible irritation, her eventual response emerging with a voice that had lost much of its earlier practiced warmth. My husband's entirely independent investment choices have absolutely no connection whatsoever to my official duties or legislative activities, and we have always complied meticulously with every required disclosure rule, because we strongly support a free market economy that permits congressional families to engage in investment activities exactly like any other American citizens. Patel nodded thoughtfully, giving the appearance of carefully weighing her explanation before responding. You have repeatedly affirmed in public statements over the years that you maintain zero involvement in his trading decisions and that they are handled completely separately. Is that position still your official testimony here today under these circumstances? That remains my absolute and unwavering position without any qualification, she answered, recovering a degree of assertiveness in her tone. You have shared a marriage that has endured for over 60 years, encompassing a common residence, joint financial matters, daily routines, regular meals together, and a complete lifelong partnership in every meaningful sense. Yet you are asserting that major legislative developments capable of shifting billions of dollars in corporate market values for companies your husband was actively investing in never once arose in conversation, even casually? Her mouth opened briefly, as if to reply, then closed, while another note from counsel arrived urgently. We have always maintained a clear and mutual understanding regarding the separation of such matters, she finally stated, though the usual confident warmth had noticeably drained from her delivery. Across 6 full decades of marriage involving shared breakfast tables, evening dinners, bedtime routines, and the full intimacy of a lifelong partnership, not a single incidental mention of upcoming semiconductor subsidy legislation while actively buying chip manufacturer stocks, or federal electric vehicle mandates while holding substantial Tesla options. The silence that followed grew even heavier than before, and it's difficult not to find a certain ironic amusement in imagining a household so rigorously compartmentalized that discussions of transformative multi-billion-dollar policy initiatives were treated as strictly off-limits topics, almost as if the Pelosi home operated under confidentiality agreements more stringent than those governing classified national security briefings. Patel drew out another document from his folder. According to available reports covering 2024 specifically, your husband's investment portfolio achieved an extraordinary 65% return, dramatically outperforming the S&P 500 index's 24% gain for the same period and surpassing even the performance of legendary investors like Warren Buffett, whose long-term career average remains around 20% annually. He didn't merely exceed the broad market benchmarks. He consistently eclipsed virtually every major hedge fund and professional money manager operating in the industry that year. then transitioning to a quieter and more somber tone. Martha Stewart ultimately served 5 months in federal prison for a single transaction involving significantly smaller sums based on limited non-public information from a tip. The most apparent distinguishing factor in that comparison seems to be that she lacked the advantage of being married to one of the most influential and powerful legislators in modern American history. Across the committee dais, a young progressive Democrat who had campaigned vigorously on promises of congressional ethics reform and transparency nodded in a manner that was subtle, yet unmistakable, a gesture quickly noticed by attentive camera operators who signaled producers urgently. This reaction was crossing traditional partisan boundaries in real time. And here's a question that resonates with many ordinary investors reflecting on these recurring patterns. If typical middle-class families lost substantial portions of their retirement savings because they lacked access to the kind of advanced signals that appear almost routine in certain high-level political households, doesn't that reality fundamentally erode public confidence in the core principle that our economic system provides equal opportunity for everyone regardless of connections? Pelosi's hands began displaying slight but clearly visible tremors as Patel proceeded methodically to the next section of his prepared materials with the same unflappable composure. Congresswoman, you have built your entire political identity and legacy on repeated assertions of possessing unmatched moral authority, consistently positioning yourself as the uncompromising protector of human rights, constitutional safeguards, and the highest possible ethical standards while frequently delivering lectures to presidents, fellow lawmakers, and the broader public on proper conduct and accountability. Let's carefully examine one especially stark and illustrative example from your earlier service on the House Intelligence Committee that directly relates to those repeated claims of superior ethical grounding. In September of 2002, while serving as the ranking Democratic member, you participated in a classified CIA briefing concerning the agency's detention and interrogation program for high-value al-Qaeda detainees held at undisclosed overseas facilities, including explicit discussion of enhanced techniques such as waterboarding that were already actively being employed, with records later showing Abu Zubaydah subjected to the procedure 83 times during the preceding summer month alone. Her attorney stood immediately to raise an objection. Mr. Chairman, this line of questioning clearly ventures into sensitive classified intelligence matters that are entirely inappropriate for discussion in an open public hearing setting. The chairman overruled the objection in a calm but firm manner, pointing out that the program's details had been extensively declassified years earlier through the comprehensive Senate Intelligence Committee report on CIA interrogation practices. Pelosi signaled her lawyer to sit back down, relying on her accumulated decades of experience in handling hostile questioning to address the matter herself. I have spoken about this issue publicly on numerous occasions over the years. We were informed that certain enhanced interrogation techniques were being seriously considered as potential tools in the toolkit, but were explicitly not told that they were already being actively implemented on detainees. And the CIA has a long and well-documented history of providing incomplete or deliberately misleading information to congressional oversight committees when it served their purposes. Patel presented additional supporting documentation. Former Republican Chairman Porter Goss, who was present in that exact same briefing alongside you, later stated publicly and unequivocally that every participant clearly understood the techniques being described, including waterboarding specifically, were intended for actual operational use rather than remaining in purely theoretical or hypothetical discussion. Leon Panetta, a Democrat who served multiple terms in Congress as your colleague before becoming CIA director under President Obama, personally reviewed the original contemporaneous records from that briefing and confirmed their accuracy regarding the full scope of what was communicated to attendees. Therefore, we have consistent accounts from bipartisan figures who were physically present, validated official agency records, and explicit confirmation from a Democratic CIA director appointed by President Obama, all pointing toward a shared understanding that contradicts the claim of universal agency deception directed exclusively at congressional members. Pelosi's expression hardened noticeably as she prepared her response. The intelligence community has repeatedly demonstrated a pattern of withholding or distorting critical details from oversight bodies whenever it aligned with their institutional interests or operational preferences. Patel tilted his head slightly in acknowledgement before continuing. It's particularly noteworthy how the perceived credibility of intelligence officials appears to fluctuate dramatically depending on immediate political needs, considered completely reliable and beyond reproach when their assessments supported certain high-profile impeachment efforts or investigations, yet suddenly portrayed as habitually dishonest when those same assessments or records contradict preferred narratives or positions, then delivering the point more directly while maintaining complete calm. Even based solely on your own public statements from 2009, you acknowledged learning definitively in February 2003 that waterboarding was actively being applied to detainees, yet you elected to remain publicly silent on the matter until 2009, encompassing a full 6 years during which the program continued, expanded, and involved additional subjects under an administration you consistently opposed. If the practice genuinely represented the severe moral violation and enduring stain on our national character that you later characterized it as, why maintain that prolonged period of public silence while the program persisted and additional detainees underwent the same techniques? Pelosi hesitated briefly in formulating her reply as her lawyer whispered additional urgent guidance, the full weight of the established timeline settling across the hearing room like a heavy fog. And doesn't that extended 6-year window of public quietude inevitably provoke reasonable questions about whether the eventual outspoken condemnation reflected authentic, principle-driven outrage, or instead represented carefully timed political strategy designed to maximize impact at the most opportune moment? Her typically ironclad composure finally showed visible cracks for the first time during the session. This entire approach is completely outrageous and unacceptable. I appeared today intending to scrutinize this director's qualifications and fitness for office, not to be ambushed with selective reinterpretations of events from 20 years ago in what is clearly a partisan exercise. The chairman stepped in with firm authority, but maintained neutrality. The proceedings would continue in an orderly fashion, with full opportunity provided for response once Patel completed his prepared testimony. Behind her on the dais, one of her most loyal and longest-serving aides, a staff member who had been with her office for 15 years through countless battles, quietly rose from his seat and exited the room without offering any explanation or looking back. A moment immediately captured by multiple cameras and highlighted by live commentators as the first tangible sign of internal support beginning to fracture. Patel transitioned seamlessly into the January 6th segment of his presentation without missing a beat. You committed 3 full years and approximately $20 million in taxpayer funds to investigating the events surrounding January 6, 2021, producing extensively publicized prime-time televised hearings and an 800-page final report that presented a specific narrative as the complete and authoritative account, while directing primary responsibility almost exclusively in one direction. Yet your select committee conspicuously declined to conduct thorough examination of critical security failures and lapses that multiple subsequent reviews and official testimonies have since brought clearly into focus. referencing detailed sworn testimony from Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, who formally requested National Guard support several days in advance, only to have the request denied by the House Sergeant-at-Arms, an official you personally appointed and who reported directly to you as Speaker, citing concerns primarily about public perception and optics. 11 separate and increasingly urgent requests for National Guard assistance went unaddressed for more than 70 minutes, while the Capitol complex was actively being breached and overrun, according to Chief Sund's comprehensive testimony provided under oath. Presenting a professionally bound, blue-covered transcript. Video footage recorded personally by your daughter, Alexandra Pelosi, for her HBO documentary project, later obtained and publicly released through the House Administration Committee, captures you stating explicitly on January 6th itself, during the evacuation process, "I take responsibility for not having them just prepared for more," when referring directly to National Guard preparedness and deployment. You verbally accepted personal responsibility for the security shortcomings on the very day they occurred, then subsequently dedicated years and substantial public resources toward attributing fault almost entirely elsewhere. Pelosi reacted with deepening color in her face and visible signs of agitation, several carefully styled strands of hair falling loose as the full implications of the disclosed footage registered completely. Why deliberately withhold such a direct and contemporaneous admission of responsibility from inclusion in the final report and public presentations, if the committee's genuine priority was comprehensive, unbiased pursuit of truth, rather than carefully curated narrative management designed to serve specific political ends? The young progressive Democrat, who had earlier shown subtle signs of agreement, was now openly documenting key points from Patel's testimony in detailed notes, his previous alignment with Pelosi's position clearly shifting in real time. Patel moved forward to address the Nunes v. Memo chapter with a tone that carried personal weight. In February of 2018, you publicly demanded the removal of Chairman Devin Nunes from his position overseeing the House Intelligence Committee, describing the memo I primarily authored as bogus, deliberately dishonest, and part of a coordinated White House cover-up effort, even suggesting that release of the document endangered national security and warranted potential obstruction of justice investigations. You actively sought to end professional careers for bringing documented irregularities to public attention. Yet the subsequent comprehensive investigation conducted by Inspector General Michael Horowitz, an appointee of President Obama, identified 17 significant errors, omissions, and deficiencies in the FISA applications targeting Carter Page, including failure to disclose the Steele dossier's partisan funding sources, its largely unverified nature, exculpatory information about Page's prior cooperation with the CIA, and most critically, an FBI lawyer's guilty plea for intentionally altering evidence submitted to the court. The central allegations we originally raised were fully validated and substantiated by official findings from a nonpartisan career investigator. You attempted to professionally destroy those who responsibly exposed verified misconduct within the Bureau. Yet the broader public judgment ultimately determined that such exposure represented exactly the kind of integrity and courage needed in leadership positions. Brief but sustained applause broke out from the Republican side of the committee, lasting several seconds without interruption from the chairman. Finally, Patel addressed the State of the Union incident with reflective gravity. On February 4, 2020, President Trump utilized the House chamber, which you presided over as Speaker, to publicly honor centenarian Tuskegee Airman Charles McGee with a well-deserved promotion to Brigadier General, a premature infant who had survived against overwhelming medical odds, and the grieving parents of Kayla Mueller, a young American humanitarian worker who was kidnapped, tortured, and ultimately murdered by ISIS leadership. As the president concluded his remarks, you stood and visibly tore your copy of the prepared speech in half on national television directly in view of those very guests whose personal stories of sacrifice and survival were being celebrated. Pelosi offered her long-standing defense with a voice that carried noticeable strain. That particular speech was filled with numerous misrepresentations and falsehoods. I was simply making a symbolic statement expressing disapproval of dishonesty from the podium. By physically destroying printed tributes to a hero who served his country with distinction despite facing racial segregation and discrimination, a living miracle child present in the gallery watching the moment unfold, and a young woman whose brutal death at the hands of terrorists I personally helped prosecute during my time working on counterterrorism cases. Patel closed his folder with deliberate finality. I am the son of immigrants who fled political persecution with literally nothing, building new lives through relentless hard work and unwavering commitment to truth and integrity. Your accusation of disgrace directed at me today stands in sharp and revealing contrast to the documented record of extraordinary wealth accumulation, extended silence on grave moral issues, suppression of inconvenient evidence, and repeated public spectacles. He formally yielded back the remainder of his allocated time. The hearing concluded amid a stunned and absolute silence that seemed to envelop the entire chamber. Pelosi departed the room without pausing to address the swarm of waiting reporters, a complete break from her 40-year practice of always engaging the press after major appearances. Video clips from the session rapidly amassed tens of millions of views across platforms. Comprehensive ethics reform proposals gained unprecedented momentum across party lines, and enduring questions continued to circulate widely. Whose conduct ultimately undermined public trust in governmental institutions the most profoundly? Comment below. Who should bear primary responsibility for the disparities, inconsistencies, and patterns that became impossible to ignore that day?